So imagine a war that permanently fractures global geopolitics.
Right.
Like it completely divides ancient empires, and it lasts for well over 1,000 years.
It's almost hard to wrap your head around a conflict of that scale.
Yeah, exactly. And now imagine that this entire world-shattering conflict wasn't fought over, a massive reserve of
Yeah.
gold or a strategic mountain pass or some dynastic succession.
Right. The usual things we think of.
Right. Imagine it was fought over a single three-word grammatical edit.
I mean, it sounds absurd when you frame it like that.
It really does.
But that is exactly the reality of what we are looking at today because we're
Yeah.
so conditioned to look for, grand, tangible causes for historical turning points.
Yeah, you want to point to a map and say, oh, resource scarcity or border dispute.
Exactly. But the most enduring fracture in the history of the Christian church defies all of those physical categories entirely.
And that is the paradox we're unpacking today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Today, we are pulling apart the primary sources and the historical frameworks to really understand the Filioque controversy.
Right.
And for you listening right now, our mission is to trace how three Latin words, which translate simply to "and the Son," literally tore the global church in half.
Because we need to be incredibly clear right up front. This was not just a linguistic quibble.
No, definitely not.
It wasn't just a bunch of ancient monks arguing over Latin grammar in some dark, dusty scriptorium.
Yeah, exactly.
This evolved into a profound, earth-shattering clash of Trinitarian theology, of high-stakes medieval geopolitics, and, well, ultimately a war over universal church authority.
It's massive.
Right,
And
right.
to navigate a topic of this magnitude, we have to rely on a very specific, deeply researched stack of documents.
Yeah, we have a great foundation for this. We're drawing heavily upon the historical frameworks laid out by scholars like John Meyendorff,
Mhm.
specifically his work on Byzantine theology, which really captures the Eastern mindset. And we're also using Jaroslav Pelikan's comprehensive volumes on the Christian tradition to understand the evolution of the doctrine.
And we also have A. Edward C. Sansby's history of this specific controversy, right?
Yes, his highly dedicated history of this single-phrase controversy is crucial. But we aren't just looking at modern scholars. We are looking at the foundational texts themselves.
The primary sources.
Exactly. We'll be digging into St. Photius's Mystagogy of the Holy Spirit from the 9th century.
Oh, that one is intense.
It really is. And finally, to bring this ancient argument all the way into your present reality, we'll be examining modern ecumenical documents.
Right, to see where things stand today.
Specifically, the declarations from the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity in 1995 and the North American Orthodox Catholic Consultation from 2003.
It's an incredible stack of research. And to really get our bearings, to understand why these scholars devoted their lives to this, I want you to transport yourself all the way back to the year 381 CE.
A very important year.
Right. We are in the Eastern Mediterranean at the formulation of what historians call the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed.
The absolute bedrock.
Yeah, this document is the foundation. It is the statement of belief for the entire Christian world. And in that original universally agreed upon text, when the Council Fathers came to the section describing the Holy Spirit, they simply stated that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father.
Full stop.
Exactly. End of sentence.
That phrase is our crucial baseline. From
Yeah.
the Father. Because the Creed of 381 was meant to be the final word,
Yeah.
the unbreakable seal on Christian orthodoxy.
Right. And what we are going to do today is trace the incredible, often chaotic journey of how that seal was broken.
It's a wild ride.
It really is. We are going to map out how an entirely innocent, highly localized pastoral edition made by regional bishops in Spain somehow spiraled into a global crisis.
Yeah. We'll trace how it was weaponized by emperors who had entirely different agendas.
Right, completely political agendas.
And how it was fiercely debated by the greatest minds of the Middle Ages. And how it eventually became the main catalyst for the Great Schism of 1054.
The permanent splitting of the Eastern and Western churches.
Precisely. And perhaps most importantly, we're going to look at what this entire millennium-spanning saga teaches us today.
Right.
Of the limits of human language, the absolute tragedy of mistranslation, and the uncompromising, often dangerous nature of institutional power.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to see how this single phrase leaked into the water supply of global theology, we have to move forward from that 381 baseline.
Right, we have a time jump.
Yeah, we are jumping from 381 CE to the year 589 CE. Geographically, we're leaving the ancient Greek world and traveling all the way to Visigothic Spain.
to a gathering known as the Third Council of Toledo.
Exactly.
This is a massive milestone in Csianski's historical timeline.
Why is that?
Because the Third Council of Toledo in 589 CE is where the Filioque, which is the Latin phrase literally meaning "and the Son," first officially enters the historical record as a formal, written addition to the creed.
Okay, so if I'm sitting in the audience right now, my immediate glaring question is why?
It's the logical question.
Right. If the entire Christian world, from Rome to Constantinople to Alexandria, had agreed on this unchangeable text in 381, why on earth are a bunch of regional bishops in Spain 2 centuries later deciding to grab a quill and start making rogue edits?
This seems crazy.
Yeah, to the foundational document of their faith. What was happening in the Iberian Peninsula that made them think this was a necessary or even legal idea?
Well, to understand the why, we have to look really closely at the political and theological environment of Visigothic Spain at that exact moment.
Okay, paint the picture for us.
Siskinski's research points out that this was a highly volatile frontier. The local Orthodox bishops were not picking a fight with the broader church.
Oh, they weren't.
No, not at all. They were fighting a desperate, localized battle against a theological movement called Arianism. And, frankly, they were losing ground.
Arianism. Okay, I know this is a massive topic on its own, but we need to define this clearly for the listeners.
Sure.
Wait, so Arius is basically saying Jesus was a sort of divine subordinate, like a demigod.
Right.
Like a Christian Hercules or something.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
That is a very accessible way to grasp it. Arianism was a deeply rooted heresy that essentially subordinated the Son to the Father.
Okay.
In the Arian view, there was a time when the Son did not exist. Therefore, the Son was a created being.
Wow, okay.
Right, a spectacularly exalted being, the highest of all creatures, but still, at the end of the day, a creature.
So not God in the absolute sense.
Crucially, no. They argued the Son was not fully co-equal, co-eternal, and consubstantial with the Father.
Wait, consubstantial. That's a heavy word, and it shows up in these sources constantly. Are we just saying they are made of the exact same God stuff?
Exactly that. Consubstantial, from the Latin consubstantial, or the Greek homoousios, means sharing the exact same substance or essence.
Got it.
Orthodox Christianity held that the Father and the Son are of the exact same divine essence. Arianism argued they were of similar but completely distinct essences.
Okay, so why was that such a big deal in Spain?
To the Orthodox bishops in Spain, this Arian belief was an existential threat to the entirety of the Christian message.
Because it lowers the status of Jesus.
Yes. If the Son is just a really powerful creature and not fully divine, then the salvation brought by the Son is fundamentally compromised.
Oh, I see.
Because a creature cannot save humanity. Only
Yeah.
God can.
So picture the situation. The local Spanish bishops are looking around, and they see this Arian belief spreading like wildfire among the Visigothic nobility.
Right, it was very popular with the ruling class.
They see people believing that the Son is somehow lesser, relegated to a secondary tier of divinity, and they realize they need a mechanism to forcefully, unequivocally assert that the Father and the Son are entirely equal.
Exactly. They needed a theological tool.
So think about the last time you tried to fix a catastrophic error in a shared Google Doc at work.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. You are like a branch manager at a multinational corporation out in a regional office, and you realize there is a massive loophole in the employee handbook causing chaos on your specific factory floor.
Total chaos.
And to stop this local chaos, to stop Arianism, you just add a quick edit to the handbook. You insert a phrase saying that the Spirit comes from the Father and the Son.
Right.
And by doing that, you're explicitly tying the Son to the Father's ultimate prerogative. You're locking them together to emphasize their total, unbreakable equality, right?
What's fascinating here is that your analogy captures the exact pastoral intent of the Third Council of Toledo.
Oh, really?
According to all our major sources, this insertion was entirely, completely meant as a local pastoral tool.
So they weren't trying to cause trouble?
No. King Redgeir of the Visigoths had just converted from Arianism to Orthodox Catholicism, and the bishops needed a liturgical hammer to drive the point home to the rest of the kingdom.
Oh, that makes sense.
When they added the filioque, they were absolutely not trying to be rebels. They were not attempting a theological coup against the Byzantine emperor or the Pope in Rome.
They weren't sitting in Toledo rubbing their hands together thinking, let's defy the universal church today and rewrite the rule.
Not at all. It was an emergency theological patch. It was a localized defense mechanism.
Right.
By professing out loud in the liturgy that the Holy Spirit proceeds from both the Father and the Son, these Western bishops were shutting the door on Arian arguments.
Because it forces you to put them on the same level.
Exactly. They were making it linguistically impossible to claim the Son was somehow lesser than the Father if they both equally shared in the procession of the Holy Spirit.
It makes complete logical sense from their paradigm. Like, you can entirely sympathize with their desperate motives.
Absolutely.
But for you listening, think about how often a well-intentioned, highly localized quick fix in any massive organization ends up becoming a permanent, unmovable policy.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Right. You patch a piece of software code just to keep the servers running for the weekend, or you make a slight adjustment to a vendor contract just to appease a single angry client.
Just a temporary fix.
Yeah, you alter a constitutional bylaw just to resolve a temporary local crisis. You genuinely think you are just solving a problem in Spain.
But you're doing much more than that.
Exactly. What you are actually doing is setting a ticking time bomb for the broader institution. Because once you write that change down, once you alter the foundational text, you have fundamentally altered the DNA of the organization.
And as we know from history, altered DNA rarely stays localized. Ideas, especially formally codified written ideas, have a tendency to travel.
Oh, they definitely travel.
And that brings us to the driving mechanism of the next massive shift in our timeline. Because a local fix in Spain absolutely did not stay in Spain. The irony is that this quick fix worked too well. It got written into the local liturgy, it got chanted by monks, it was copied into manuscripts, and it slowly began to creep across the Pyrenees.
Right. It bleeds outward. We move from the late 6th century into the late 8th century, and the filioque makes its way from the Iberian Peninsula into the absolute heart of the Frankish Empire.
Yes, into entirely new territory.
It lands directly on the desk of a king who didn't care at all about Spanish heresies, but he cared very much about building a global empire.
Charlemagne.
Charlemagne.
The context here shifts dramatically, and this is where the history becomes incredibly dark and political.
Yeah, this part is wild.
We are moving from a pastoral defense against Arianism to a grand geopolitical offensive under the court of Charlemagne.
Wow.
By the late 700s, specifically around the Council of Frankfurt in 794, the filioque is no longer just a local teaching tool. Charlemagne's theologians take this three-word phrase and they weaponize it on the world stage.
This is the part of the narrative that completely blows my mind, because the sheer audacity of what Charlemagne does is staggering.
It really is bold.
His court adopts this Spanish addition, this "and the Son" phrase, but they don't just quietly adopt it for their own local church services in Aachen.
No, that wouldn't be enough.
Right. They turn around and use it as a geopolitical bludgeon against the Eastern Church in Constantinople, against the Byzantines, or the Greeks, as the Franks dismissively started calling them.
The rhetoric gets very heated.
Charlemagne's theologians, guys like Alcuin of York, actively accuse the East of heresy for omitting the filioque.
It is a stunningly aggressive posture. And to understand how he justified this, we have to look at his political motivations.
Right. What did he want?
Charlemagne was engaged in a massive project of empire building. He wanted to be crowned the Holy Roman Emperor.
A huge ambition.
He was attempting to position the Frankish Empire as the true, legitimate successor to the ancient Roman legacy, making his court the new center of gravity for the Christian world.
But there was a problem, right?
Yes, a big problem. The Roman Empire still existed in the East, in Constantinople.
Right, the Byzantines. And at this specific time, the Byzantine throne was occupied by a woman, Empress Irene.
Exactly. Charlemagne looked at Empress Irene and essentially argued that the throne of the Roman Empire was vacant because a woman held it.
Wow. Just entirely dismissing her.
Completely. But to fully legitimize his own imperial claims, he needed more than just political maneuvering. He needed theological supremacy.
He had to prove he was morally superior.
Yes. He needed to delegitimize the Byzantine Empire morally and intellectually. So his theologians seize upon the creed. They notice that the Greeks do not say, "and the Son."
Right.
And instead of recognizing that the Franks were the ones who had adopted a later Spanish edition, the Frankish court actively propagates the idea that the Greeks had maliciously deleted the phrase from the ancient creed.
Wait, I really need to pause and highlight this for the listener, because that is next-level manipulation.
Oh, absolutely.
Charlemagne accuses the East of heresy for sticking to the original text. The East is literally just reciting the creed exactly as it was written at the Ecumenical Council in 381 CE without the Spanish edition.
Yes, word for word.
And Charlemagne points at them and says, "You left out the filioque, you deleted it, you are heretics. That is incredible geopolitical gaslighting. He is rewriting history to justify an empire.
Gaslighting is an incredibly accurate modern term for what occurred. He was manufacturing a theological crisis to justify a political usurpation.
So how on earth does Rome, the papacy, react to this? They must have been caught completely in the middle of this massive power play. Rome knows what the original text is.
They were caught in an agonizing, virtually impossible position. The historical framework provided by Miendorf detailing the reaction of Pope Leo III, who reigned during this exact period from 795 to 816, is one of the most compelling, tense episodes in this entire saga.
I can imagine.
Pope Leo III finds himself walking an almost impossibly thin diplomatic and theological tightrope.
Because he needs Charlemagne, right? Charlemagne is the military muscle protecting the city of Rome from invasions. The Pope literally crowned Charlemagne emperor in the year 800.
Exactly. Charlemagne is the great, indispensable protector of the papacy. Without Frankish swords, Rome is incredibly vulnerable.
Right.
The Pope absolutely cannot afford to completely alienate the Frankish emperor. But at the very same time, the Pope is the ultimate custodian of the universal tradition of the Church.
So he knows the truth.
He knows Charlemagne's theologians are historically wrong about the Greeks deleting the phrase.
Wow.
So Leo III makes a highly nuanced, highly precarious distinction. According to the historical records of their meetings, the Pope tells Charlemagne's envoys that he affirms the theology of the Filioque.
Okay.
He agrees that the underlying theological point the Franks and the Spanish are making about the Son being co-equal is orthodox and true.
Because he's against Arianism, too.
Exactly. However, and this is the critical pivot, he vehemently refuses to alter the Universal Creed. He flat out refuses to let the Franks insert the words into the foundational document.
Wait, so the Pope is effectively agreeing with the Franks' theology, but fighting them on the formatting of the document.
Essentially, yeah.
That feels incredibly pedantic, doesn't it? If he agrees the theology is true, why not just add the words? Was he just trying to save face politically with the East?
It looks pedantic to modernize, I agree. But in the context of the early medieval church, it wasn't about formatting. It was about constitutional law.
Oh, I see.
The Pope recognized that the creed was the ultimate symbol of Christian unity. It was a covenant document.
Right.
If he allowed a Western political ruler to unilaterally change the text of a universal council, he would be establishing a precedent that the empire was superior to the church councils.
That would be a dangerous precedent.
Very dangerous. Leo recognized that the truth of a statement doesn't automatically give you the right to insert it into a historical document.
He agrees with the idea, but he utterly rejects the tampering of the text. And this leads to one of the most striking, almost cinematic visual details in all of our source material.
It's an amazing moment.
Picture this. Pope Leo III is facing immense, crushing political pressure from Charlemagne's massive empire to officially change the creed in Rome. So what does the Pope do?
He makes a huge statement.
He commissions two enormous, heavy silver shields. On one shield, he has the original unedited creed engraved in Greek. On the other shield, he has the original unedited creed engraved in Latin.
Right.
Neither of them contains the Filioque. And he takes these massive silver shields and physically mounts them on the walls of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, right by the tomb of the apostle.
It is a breathtaking act of defiance. And the inscription he placed alongside them is equally telling. He wrote that he placed them there for the love and preservation of the Orthodox faith.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the symbolism of those silver shields is profound.
It's physical. It's not a subtle letter sent by a courier. It's metal bolted to the wall of the most important church in the West.
Yes, it is a material, indestructible barrier erected by the Bishop of Rome against Frankish political pressure.
A literal shield.
Exactly. It is a physical manifestation of the idea that the universal tradition of the Church cannot be altered by the unilateral political will of an emperor, no matter how many armies that emperor commands.
Right.
The shields represent an unyielding boundary. Leo is looking at Charlemagne and saying, I agree with your theology, but this text belongs to everyone, and you do not have the right to force a change.
It's an incredible story of resistance, but as we know from reading ahead in the sources, the silver shields ultimately weren't enough.
No, they weren't.
That physical boundary didn't hold forever, because eventually, within a couple of centuries, people were willing to actually excommunicate each other, to completely sever the Christian world in half over this exact issue. And to understand why they were willing to go to such apocalyptic extremes, we have to look past the geopolitics of Charlemagne and dive deep into the underlying philosophies of God.
We have to look at the theological matrix.
Great. Because the political clash we just described was, in many ways, just masking a much deeper, much more profound theological divergence.
This is where we move from history into ontology.
Let's pause. Ontology is one of those words that gets thrown around in academic papers. What does that actually mean in this context?
Ontology is the philosophical study of the nature of being itself. It asks, what does it mean to exist?
Okay.
In theology, Trinitarian ontology asks, how does God exist? To understand the depth of this fracture between East and West, we have to examine the competing fundamental visions of the Trinity that were colliding.
Right.
And our sources provide us with the two key intellectual architects of this collision: St. Photius the Great in the Byzantine East and St. Augustine of Hippo in the Latin West.
Okay, let's start with the East. Let's look at St. Photius the Great. He's writing in the 9th century, right in the aftermath of the Charlemagne controversy. He writes a landmark treatise called the Mystagogy of the Holy Spirit.
A brilliant text.
What is the core of the Eastern Greek argument against the Filioque? Like, why do they hate it so much?
The Eastern Orthodox position, as meticulously championed by Photius, is anchored entirely in a foundational concept called the monarchy of the Father.
The monarchy of the Father, meaning the Father is the absolute king of the Trinity.
Not king in terms of bossing the others around, but king in terms of origin. In Orthodox theology, the Father is the arch.
Arch.
Yes, that is a vital Greek term, meaning the absolute singular sole source and origin of divinity.
Oh, I see.
Everything in the Trinity flows exclusively from the Father. The Son is begotten of the Father. The Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father.
Okay, so everything starts there.
Yes. The Father's unique, defining, unchangeable personal property is that he is the unoriginate cause of the other two persons.
So, to Photius, if you suddenly inject the Filioque, if you say out loud that the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, you are violently violating that singular origin.
Exactly.
Ah.
Photius argued passionately, with intense logical rigor, that if you say the Spirit proceeds from the Son as well, you are logically suggesting two separate origins of divinity.
Oh, I get it.
You are introducing a double cause. And to the Eastern Greek mind, a double cause destroys the absolute mathematical unity of God.
Wow.
If the Father is the sole, unique source, adding a second source is an ontological catastrophe.
Let's pause again. Ontological catastrophe sounds like a sci-fi movie concept, like the universe is ripping apart.
To Photius, it essentially was.
Really?
Yes. If God is defined by perfect unity and you introduce a concept that splits the source of God into two, you are no longer talking about the Christian God. You're talking about a philosophical
A monster. Wow.
It shatters the monarchy of the Father, which was the only thing holding the unity of the Trinity together in Greek thought.
Okay, that makes perfect sense from their paradigm. Like, I can see why they would fight to the death over that. But the West wasn't trying to destroy the unity of God.
No, absolutely not.
They weren't trying to create a monster. They had their own genius architect, St. Augustine, who was operating on a completely different framework centuries earlier.
Yes.
How did Augustine view this? Why didn't he see the double cause problem?
Augustine approached the mystery of the Trinity not primarily through the lens of a single originating source, but through the lens of internal relations.
Internal relations.
This is the foundational difference between Greek and Latin thought. In his massive work, De Trinitate, Augustine argued that the persons of the Trinity are defined entirely by their relationships to one another. Furthermore, because the Father and the Son are entirely one in substance, they share the exact same divine essence, that consubstantial nature we talked about, the Holy Spirit, must logically proceed from both of them.
Oh, because they share everything.
Exactly. Augustine often characterized the Holy Spirit beautifully as the mutual bond of love between the Father and the Son. Therefore, the love must flow between both.
Right. If they share absolutely everything in their divine nature, they must share the act of breathing forth the Spirit.
Yes. But Augustine was incredibly careful to maintain unity. He anticipated the Eastern objection.
Did he?
He did. He didn't say the Spirit proceeds from them as two separate competing sources. He used a very specific Latin phrase, tanquam ab uno principio.
What does that mean?
It means the Spirit proceeds from both of them as from a single, unified principle.
Ah, a single principle.
Because the Father and Son are perfectly, inextricably united, their breathing forth of the Spirit is a single, unified, indistinguishable act.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because you have these two towering intellects, Photius and Augustine, both desperately trying to protect the unity of God, but doing it in completely incompatible ways.
They are completely incompatible.
Let me try to visualize this for the listener to see if I'm tracking the mechanics of this correctly. Is the Orthodox view, the view of Photius, kind of like a massive singular underground spring, which represents the Father?
Yes, okay.
And this single spring feeds two distinct, beautiful rivers, the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Yes, that is an excellent visualization of the monarchy of the Father. The spring is the sole, undisputed source.
Right. So if that's the Eastern view, then Photius is looking at the Western Filioque, and he is saying, if you tell me that the river of the Holy Spirit is somehow flowing out of the river of the Son, you are completely ruining the geometry of the landscape.
Exactly.
We're claiming there are two springs. You are adding a second source, which destroys the unique reality of the first spring. You are destroying the unity of the entire water system.
Exactly. But to fully understand the tragedy, we have to build on your analogy for the Western side.
Okay, let's do it.
Augustine isn't looking at a single spring and two rivers. When Augustine looks at the Father and the Son, he is looking at a massive, profound lake formed by the melting of two identical, completely unified glaciers.
Oh, wow.
The water is perfectly mixed. It is one substance. You cannot separate the water of the Father from the water of the Son.
Right.
Therefore, the river of the Holy Spirit that flows out of that lake must necessarily flow from the completely unified waters of both.
That is brilliant. So if Augustine looks at the Eastern view, where the Son has absolutely no role in the origin of the Spirit, he feels like the East is artificially walling off the Son.
Yes.
He feels that if you omit the Filioque, you are demoting the Son. You are saying the Son doesn't fully share in the essence of the Father's lake.
It is a profound, seemingly unsolvable dialectic. The West, relying on Augustine, feels that omitting the Filioque demotes the Son back to Arianism.
Right.
The East, relying on Photius, feels that adding the Filioque confuses the unique personal properties of the Father and destroys the origin of God. They were both looking at the exact same divine mystery. They both believe with absolute certainty that they are protecting the majesty of God. But they are using entirely different blueprints to build the exact same house.
And when you are using fundamentally different blueprints, the house is eventually going to tear itself apart.
Exactly.
Because if the theology is this gridlocked, if Photius and Augustine are both logically sound within their own distinct linguistic and philosophical paradigms, how do you resolve it? Who gets to make the final call?
This raises an important question, perhaps the most important structural question of the entire controversy.
Yeah, how do you break the tie?
Because you are exactly right. The theology had reached an absolute impasse. And historically, when theology is deadlocked, the conflict inevitably shifts from the realm of ideas to the realm of administration.
Naturally.
It shifts from ontology to ecclesiology, the structure of the church itself. The ultimate crisis became not just what the words meant, but who actually had the raw authority to change the foundational document of the faith in the first place.
Right. Who owns the creed? If we go back to our sources, particularly Pelikan's analysis of the canonical tradition, the Orthodox defense on this front is remarkably straightforward and legally binding.
It is very clear.
They maintain that the creed is the collective property of the entire church. It does not belong to any single bishop, not even the Pope in Rome.
Right.
And they don't just base this on a vague sentiment of brotherhood, they base it on hard-written canonical law. Specifically, the East constantly points to Canon VII of the Council of Ephesus, which took place in 431 CE.
A very famous canon.
Yeah, this was a universally recognized ecumenical council, and Canon VII strictly, explicitly forbade anyone from composing or altering the creed without the gathering of another full universal ecumenical council. It was a constitutional lock on the document.
It was a canonical safeguard designed precisely to prevent what the West was attempting to do. The East argued from a position of conciliarity. This is the belief that the Holy Spirit guides the church through consensus, through the gathering of all the bishops. A universally agreed upon text requires a universally agreed upon process to change it.
Which makes sense.
You absolutely cannot have unilateral executive alterations to a shared covenant.
But the West had developed a radically different understanding of how authority works.
They had. Over the centuries, aided by the political collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the Roman papacy had developed a highly centralized ecclesiology.
The power concentrated in Rome.
Exactly. The Pope was no longer just the first among equals. He was increasingly viewed as the supreme monarch of the Church. For Rome, the Filioque slowly transformed from a nuanced theological debate into a strict litmus test for papal primacy.
And this leads to the moment the silver shields finally fall.
Yes. By the year 1014, under immense pressure from the German Emperor Henry II, who was in Rome for his coronation, and was shocked that the Romans didn't sing the creed with the Filioque like they did up north, the papacy officially capitulated. Rome adopted the Filioque into the Roman Mass. This was a monumental, irreversible shift. The Roman position held that the successor of Peter the Pope possessed a unique, inherent, God-given authority to clarify doctrine for the universal church.
Even without a council.
Yes. From their perspective, if a theological point like the Filioque was objectively true, and they believed Augustine definitively proved it was true, then the Pope did not need to wait for the cumbersome, highly political machinery of an ecumenical council to approve it.
Like he could just bypass it.
He had the executive authority to simply declare it and insert it.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the breaking point. The climax of this centuries-long buildup. We arrive at the year 1054 CE.
The Great Schism.
The event known to history as the Great Schism. The formal mutual excommunication of the Eastern and Western churches. Now, our sources point out that this wasn't just a sudden theological argument that got out of hand.
No, it was building for a long time.
There were massive geopolitical tensions. The Normans were invading Byzantine territories in southern Italy. The Pope was trying to assert military control. The Byzantine patriarch Michael Cerularius was closing Latin churches in Constantinople.
It was a powdercade.
It really was. But Pelikan makes it explicitly clear that when the spark finally hit the powder, the Filioque was the primary blaring charge leveled by both sides.
The scene itself is one of the most dramatic in medieval history.
Oh, it's wild.
In the summer of 1054, Pope Leo IX sends a delegation to Constantinople, led by a fiery, uncompromising man named Cardinal Humbert.
Humbert.
Humbert was not a diplomat. He was a papal supremacist. After weeks of furious arguments with the Eastern Patriarch, Humbert decides he has had enough.
Picture the atmosphere. It is July 16th, 1054. We are inside the Hagia Sophia, the most magnificent church in the world.
Incredible setting.
It is a Saturday afternoon, right as the Divine Liturgy is about to begin. The church is filled with clergy, with incense, with chanting. And Cardinal Humbert marches right down the center aisle, walks straight up to the main altar, and physically slams down a papal bull of excommunication.
Just a total mic drop moment.
Unbelievable. And in that document, among other wild accusations, Humbert explicitly accuses the Greeks of deleting the Filioque from the creed. He repeats Charlemagne's old lie.
And in response, the Eastern Patriarch burns the document and excommunicates Humbert right back.
Naturally.
And in the East formal response, the unilateral insertion of the Filioque was cited as the ultimate proof of Roman tyranny.
Tyranny.
That word tyranny is key. To the East, the fact that Rome changed the creed alone proved that Rome viewed itself as a master over the church rather than a brother within it. It proved that Rome believed it was above the ancient councils, above the shared canons.
This is so profoundly relatable, even to our modern world. Well, think about any modern constitutional crisis in a government, or a massive corporate merger that falls apart at the 11th hour. When these massive, complex human systems break down, it almost never breaks down purely over the content of a rule change.
That's a great point.
It breaks down over the process. The East felt that Rome bypassed the board of directors. Rome felt the CEO had executive privilege and didn't need the board's approval to clarify a basic truth. It's a crisis of governance as much as a crisis of faith.
It is the eternal unresolved tension between conciliarity decision by consensus and primacy decision by a singular executive authority. The Filioque just happened to be the theological battlefield where this ecclesiological war was fought.
So the church splits in 1054, and for nearly 1,000 years, this schism rigidly defines the Christian world. East and West, separated by a theological iron curtain, largely over these three words and the authority used to insert them.
A millennium of division.
Which brings us to the modern era of our source stack. Because after a full millennium of this, after the Crusades, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, all of it, I have to ask, are we just doomed to fight this specific battle forever? Do the modern sources offer any hope that this ancient knot can be untangled?
The later sources in our stack are actually profoundly optimistic, though cautiously so.
Okay, good.
We see a massive tectonic shift in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. We are moving from an era of mutual condemnation, which lasted for 900 years, into what the modern ecumenical documents call a phase of theological compatibility.
Theological compatibility.
The two key sources that document this breakthrough are the clarification from the Pontifical Council for Promoted Christian Unity in 1995 and the agreed statement from the North American Orthodox Catholic Consultation in 2003.
The 2003 consultation is particularly fascinating because when you read their conclusions after looking at all this bitter history, they make a massive paradigm-shifting statement.
They do.
They concluded that the filioque should no longer be a church-dividing issue. They essentially said, this grammatical issue that caused the schism in 1054 shouldn't keep us apart today.
Right.
So what does this all mean? Did someone finally cave? After 1,000 years, did the East just accept the filioque? Or did Rome agree to formally drop it?
Neither, actually. It was much more profound than a simple capitulation by one side.
Oh, really?
The breakthrough wasn't about someone surrendering, it was about semantic revelation. For the first time, scholars and theologians from both sides sat down without the baggage of medieval politics and dug deeply into the pure linguistics of the ancient texts.
Just looking at the words.
Exactly. And what they discovered is that the Greek and Latin words that had been violently arguing with each other for 1,000 years were not actually saying the exact same thing.
Wait, what?
They carried entirely different semantic weights.
Let's break that down because this is the absolute crux of the modern understanding. Let's look at the Greek word first.
Okay. The original Greek word for procession used in the 381 Creed is ekporeusis.
Ekporeusis.
Now, linguistically, ekporeusis is a very strict, highly precise, almost aggressive term. It refers exclusively to the ultimate originating source. It means the absolute uncaused beginning of a thing.
Yeah.
Therefore, when a Greek speaker hears that the Spirit proceeds, or ekporeusis, from the Father, they are hearing that the Father is the sole, absolute originating cause.
Which perfectly aligns with St. Photius and the monarchy of the Father.
Exactly. It is a linguistic fortress protecting the single origin.
So that's the Greek side.
But now let's look at the Latin translation. When the Greek Creed was translated into Latin for the Western Church, the word used for procession was proceder.
Proceder.
Now, proceder is a much broader, much more elastic, generic term. It simply refers to a going forth or a communication of essence.
Ooh.
It does not strictly imply the ultimate original source. It can simply mean a flowing through, a transmission, or a shared communal dynamic.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where this is going.
The 1995 Pontifical Council document was vital here. In that document, the Roman Catholic Church explicitly affirmed the Eastern concept of the monarchy of the Father.
It did.
Yes, Rome stated clearly in writing that the Father is indeed the sole, ultimate originating source of the Trinity. This massive statement aligned Rome much closer to Eastern concerns than it had been in a millennium.
That's a huge shift.
They clarified that the filioque was never meant to challenge the Father's unique role as the sole arch.
So let me map this out to make sure I grasp the sheer tragedy of this. When the Latins in the West said the Spirit proceder from the Father and the Son, they just meant that the Spirit flows forth within the shared divine communion of the Father and Son's lake of water.
Exactly.
They weren't claiming two ultimate sources. But when the Greeks in the East heard that translated, they automatically mapped the Latin claim onto their strict word ekporeusis.
Yes, that's what happened.
They heard the West claiming that the Spirit has two ultimate absolute originating sources, which to them was blatant universe-destroying heresy.
You have hit the nail on the head. When Greeks heard the Latin translation, they heard a terrifying heresy. When Latins used their word, they just meant a shared communal flow of love.
Wow.
It was a catastrophic mismatch of vocabulary. The two languages simply did not possess a one-to-one equivalent for the mechanics of divine origin.
Are you telling me that 1,000-year global schism, a division that literally shaped European politics, fueled wars, divided ancient empires, and permanently altered the cultural landscape of the world, was fueled in massive part by a tragic lost in translation moment?
Yes.
That is almost heartbreaking.
It is a profound tragedy of history. The 2003 consultation essentially concluded that if Photius and Augustine had been able to sit in a room together with a really good Greek-Latin dictionary, they probably could have worked this out.
That is just wild.
But as our sources remind us, We have to temper our excitement regarding this modern semantic breakthrough.
Oh, why is that?
Because while achieving theological compatibility on paper is a monumental achievement, the historical reality remains. The lingering boundary is still there.
Right, because we are back to the authority issue, the silver shields.
Precisely. Even if the theology is harmonized today, even if both sides agree that they're basically saying the same thing using different linguistic frameworks, the factual historical reality cannot be erased.
Rome still changed it.
Rome unilaterally altered a universally shared creed without convening an ecumenical council. That historical hurt, that breach of conciliar trust, remains a massive, tangible boundary marker to full reunion today.
So the wounds are still there.
You can solve the linguistics in a boardroom in 2003, but healing a millennium-old breach of trust regarding universal church authority takes much, much longer.
It is a staggering story from start to finish. Let's try to pull all of these complex threads together for a concise recap.
Sounds good.
We started with a local Spanish pastoral edit at the Council of Toledo in 589, just a regional branch manager trying to fix an employee handbook to fight off the Arian heresy.
Right.
That innocent edit slowly spreads and gets hijacked by aggressive Frankish geopolitics under Charlemagne, who uses it to gaslight the Byzantines.
It escalated quickly.
It meets fierce physical resistance from Pope Leo III, who literally bolts silver shields to the walls of St. Peter's to protect the original text.
Powerful image.
Despite those shields, it erupts into a massive foundational theological dispute between the brilliant but incompatible minds of St. Augustine in the West and St. Photius in the East.
The clash of titans.
It ultimately becomes the primary catalyst for the Great Schism of 1054, with Cardinal Humbert slamming a bull of excommunication on the altar of the Hagia Sophia, largely due to violently clashing views on papal authority and who owns the shared tradition,
Yes.
only to be partially resolved a full millennium later by modern theologians sitting down and looking really, really closely at the semantic weight of a Greek and Latin dictionary.
It is a remarkable historical arc that touches on almost every single aspect of human organization. Faith, power, the evolution of language, and the deeply tragic consequences of misunderstanding. And if we connect all of this historical data to a final underlying mechanism, it leaves us with something quite profound to consider regarding our own modern interactions.
What was that?
If the deepest, most enduring fracture in Christian history was perpetuated for centuries, largely because the Greek word ekourousis and the Latin word proceder carried slightly different semantic weights,
Yeah.
how many of the intractable, seemingly insurmountable conflicts in your own life, in your workplace, or in our deeply polarized modern political discourse are actually just two sides violently agreeing with each other?
Wow.
How often are we trapped by the limitations of our own vocabulary and a stubborn historical refusal to share authority?
That is an incredible thought to end on. How much of our daily conflict is just a tragic illusion of language. Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a new lens on history, on the mechanics of theology, and maybe even on the way you communicate with the people in your own life. Keep questioning the things you think you know, and keep exploring. We'll see you next time.